Well, that was Wira Davis. Let's talk more about this to Nabila Ramdani, who's a Middle East commentator, recently back from Libya. You were in Tripoli, I think, only last week. Picking up what Wira was saying there about these pockets of resistance, we're getting familiar with the names such as Ras Lanuf and Bin Jawad, which is back in Colonel Gaddafi's hands. Is it to oversimplify things to say you judge a winner by who controls the oil at the end of the day?
I think it's not a simplification. I think it's a crucial aspect of what's going on the ground. There are two key cities here, Ras Lanuf and Brega, which are where all the oil and gas reserves are. And whoever takes control of that has the upper hand. And if Gaddafi manages to regain control over these two cities, then he will be in a much stronger position, because it means that he will be able to cut all supplies of oil and gas and indeed electricity to the eastern part of the country. So the rebels will have the tanks that they have at the moment, but no oil to move them.
Let's just have a look at a map of Libya and just work out where we are at the moment, because it's often quite confusing, the picture here. You've got Benghazi there in the east, Tripoli in the west. Traditionally, the east has been held by rebels. The area around Tripoli has, until recently, been controlled by Gaddafi. And then Bin Jawad and Ras Lanuf we see there. How important, Ras Lanuf you talked about oil, but Bin Jawad, which is back in Gaddafi's hands, how important is that geographically?
Well, geographically, the Tripoli itself has always been the stronghold of the Gaddafi regime. So has always been the western part of the country. Now we're seeing that gradually opposition groups are taking hold of pockets around Tripoli itself. But it has to be said that there are still very loyal tribes to the Gaddafi regime in the outskirts of Tripoli.
I'm going to stop you there, because you're talking about tribes, and we're not talking here about just opposition to Gaddafi. We're talking about different agendas and a very strong tribal leadership. Several tribes, 4 tribes particularly, trying to control the area around.
Very much so, and we've seen since the beginning of the uprising that some tribes have indeed defected Gaddafi, but some are still very loyal to him, including the Al-Magraha tribe, from which Al-Magrahi, the Lockerbie bomber, is part of, but also the Tarhuna tribe, which are still very loyal to Gaddafi. And even though we're seeing that, we have a very emboldened opposition to the Gaddafi regime, it has to be said that there is no political, a culture of political dissent in Libya as such, and that's why it's very hard for any opposition to be a united front.
OK. Now, let's just look at other stories that we're covering. Of course, this British mission to the east, resulting in a rather chaotic arrest of 8 members of a diplomatic team. We know more than that. The front page of The Independent this morning suggesting that the Americans have a secret plan to arm Libya's rebels. What do you make of what the West seems to be doing, and just how a high-risk strategy that is?
Well, first of all, I think the arrest and indeed deportation of the SAS unit, including a so-called diplomat who turns out to be an MI6 agent, is a rather humiliating experience for Britain. We're also hearing reports that the Americans are positioning agents at the borders of Libya to gather intelligence. The Libyans, the rebels themselves, are absolutely furious of any Western interference. Whenever they gain control over a city, it's always followed by celebrations, and you can see banners reading, "We can do it alone, we want freedom on our own terms." And it says something about the disaster of Afghanistan, the disaster of Iraq, and the disaster of the war on terror on the Muslim world in general. And still we are lulled into that false logic that the only people who can sort out the problems in the Arab world, and indeed in the Muslim world, are the British or indeed the American industrial military complex.
And of course, Colonel Gaddafi will now be under no illusions as to where loyalties lie outside Libya.
Very much so.
And how much of a problem could that be in the future?
Well, I think if Gaddafi manages to pull that one off, Western countries will be there to do business again with him very soon.
OK, well, it's great to have you in again, Nabila Ramdani. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks.